This is MichMash, a weekly conversation where we try to unjumble an important and sometimes under-the-radar statewide story that affects you. I'm Cheyna Roth.
And I'm Alethia Kasben. Cheyna, do you ever feel like the time between the primary election in August and the general election in November is too short?
I can't say that the election season has ever felt short to me, especially in recent years, but go on.
Well, there is a renewed push to move the state's primary election to earlier in the year. It's currently in early August, and a proposal is being discussed that would move it to May.
This conversation, I'm having a little bit of deja vu, has happened before, especially in light of election law changes voters have approved in recent years. Things like expanded absentee voting and early in-person voting. Clerks in general support more time between the primary and the general, so they have, obviously, more time to hit all the requirements that they have.
But the most recent iteration of this conversation is in its early stages, and lawmakers, including Republicans and Democrats, are talking about moving this primary up for the 2026 election. Yes, that is right. The primary that is already less than a year away could potentially be even earlier.
Now, even clerks who want the change are concerned about the idea of it happening this quickly. Republican House Speaker Matt Hall, however, has said he won't put a bill up for a vote that moves the election in 2026.
So we'll see what happens if it happens in 2026 or later. And even looking even further out, not everyone loves this idea, of course, especially if lawmakers move it in 2026. Democrat Abdul El-Sayed, who is running for the U.S. Senate, has slammed the potential move as a benefit to the establishment. And there has been, some speculation that moving the primary in 2026 would help the major party nominees, the winners of the Republican and Democratic primaries, recover from their elections and prepare to take on Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan, who, without party affiliation, does not have to run in a primary.
Other candidates have been receptive, and there hasn't been a huge uproar about the proposal. However, we should stress, legislation has not yet been introduced, and as we know, lawmakers are still struggling to come up with a budget agreement. So it's hard to know where this, or really anything else, lands on the priority list.
At the very least, I would expect a budget first and election law changes second, right? But we'll see. This is a proposal that has been discussed before, has some backing, and would mark a significant change. If we see a long run-up to this getting acted on or something more immediate is yet to be seen.
Well, we are going to switch gears now, and after this short break, we're going to talk to John Selleck, Republican consultant who founded the firm Harbor Strategic, about the Michigan Republican Party's Mackinac Conference. Stick around.
We are joined now by John Selleck, Republican consultant and founder of the firm Harbor Strategic. John, thanks so much for joining us again on MichMash.
Heck yeah, big fan, glad to be here.
So, John, this weekend I was on Mackinac Island, not for a fun trip with my family or a bike ride around the island, but to cover more than 1,000 Michigan Republican Party members at their biennial conference. So you've been to this conference before, sort of on the candidate official working side.
150 times.
150 times. So what does this conference mean? What are Republicans trying to do here?
I think it's a really interesting question, because if you walk up to the Grand Hotel, there is a historical plaque in front talking about this conference because it goes back so far. And in some ways, we might need to start considering it as kind of a relic or an antique. Everybody's out there talking about, how did it compare to last time or the time before? And we can do that because the time before it sucked, right? It was terrible. And so credit to the people involved now. But it started in a time when there was no social media. There weren't conference calls or video Zooms or anything like that. So people around the state, some guy or gal sitting in Kalamazoo in 1945, and they're like, I'm going to run for attorney general. I got to show up at Mackinac. I got to make friends. I got to network and do all that stuff. And we have a far less of a need for these kind of things. That said, it's still an advantage for the GOP to have it there. It's there so that these candidates, like I talk about, who want to make the rounds for the hardest core supporters in the party will find interest in them, particularly, I think, not so much for governor, even though it's still important, but it's for those convention races. When you're running for attorney general, which I've had a couple bosses who did that and won, Secretary of State, I was assisted on that thing before, and all the college boards and Supreme Court and all that good stuff. So it still serves a role for that. But I think times are changing, and there's a lot of competition for that event.
So you weren't at the conference this year, but
I was at Hollow Weekend at Cedar Point because my wife said it was part of our 10th anniversary.
Way better.
I have a bruise on my arm for how many times she was grabbing me. I'm like, you wanted to come to this thing. Like, what is going on here?
But knowing you did pay attention to what was coming out of it. What was the most interesting thing you heard over the weekend?
Oh, yeah, I was in trouble because I kept looking at my phone nonstop. I think the most interesting thing for the weekend is like who won it. And having in the past worked for candidates that ran for governor, like Mike Cox and Bill Schuette, we pay attention to the straw poll not because it decides who wins necessarily, although there's a decent track record there. It's because it's a sign of organizational strength. Do you have your act together? Do you have a good team in place? And there's just no question that Eric Nesbitt won the weekend. That's the biggest thing I take away from it. There's some other interesting notes. But in a field where it kind of seemed like there was John James and like several other people who are really good quality candidates, but they didn't have the money to spend yet to build their name ID, Eric Nesbitt stood above the crowd.
So, the straw poll I thought was really interesting too. We came into the weekend, and I think this is still probably, what most people are thinking, but, U.S. Rep. John James is, the front runner in the gubernatorial race. That's sort of what everyone, is saying. That's what the general thought is. But he came in fourth in the straw poll, right? What does that really mean? I mean, because you're also saying like this conference could be a relic. It's 492 like Michigan Republican Party delegates. Are they reflective of the primary voting population, even in a Republican primary?
Not entirely, certainly not, because they're the ones that are paying the most close attention. They're the ones that really wanted to get up there. They were willing to spend the money, drive up there, take the ferry, smell the horses, and hobnob with all the folks that are up there. That said, you still, if you're going to be considered the front runner, you have a responsibility, basically, to show that you have the best organization, that you can make things happen. What the James campaign seems to have chosen to do right now is to not expend resources on a lot of things like this. They're looking at multiple polls that they got, and it showed them, I think John James said, I'm 50 points ahead in the poll, right? Whatever the last poll that came out from his camp. And I put out a poll at the beginning that showed the same thing. Like, that's just a fact. Like, we can't change that part. John James has run for statewide office twice. He's won in Congress twice. He's considered a rising star, rock star, type candidate in the GOP. Those are just like factual things. Like, in their heart of hearts, if any of these other candidates could switch places with him on name ID, they do it in a second. So they're attacking it now. It's kind of like hollow and empty because there's not a lot of perception. There's what's like the pollsters will say, what's the intensity of belief in that candidate? They're saying it's not there yet. So perhaps once they're on the field spending money and doing things in a wider zone, those numbers would close rapidly. And maybe what we saw this weekend is that's true. But in the last several days, the strategy to basically kind of like fly over the Mackinac conference has not sat well with the people that go to it. They kind of punished them.
So kind of along those same lines, what do you make of the Republican races for Attorney General and Secretary of State so far?
I saw a couple interesting takes on the Secretary of State's race. Quite often the people who get in first are the folks that either are one of two people. They're gadflies, or they actually have some organization, some energy, and some money to spend. And Yatuma certainly seems to be doing that. She did really well in the poll. There's a couple other candidates that did well in there. And maybe it's biased having served around the legislature at the same time as Tony Forlini, but he's got a great resume. He is the clerk of the third biggest county in the state. He's been pro-Trump all along. And he jumped in as a write-in candidate and came in third place. That shows, we keep talking about organizational push. Whoever he's got working with him, plus his team, did a pretty good job there. That's something to really take note of, I think. And then poof, surprisingly, or not, he announces that he's
a few days later.
So it's like one of those situations where you can come in third and kind of feel like you were the winner. Because I think if Yatuma didn't win, that would have been shocking for her. So she did her job and got her thing done. So it looks like we're going to have a fight on our hands in that race. And the AG's race, which obviously I've worked for two AGs. I've been around that quite a bit. The ability for people who are in that role to be deeply involved into what's happening in the hot button issues of GOP politics is important. The same goes for the Dems. When we're watching the videos of the three Dems and they look like they're going to have a knockdown, drag out fight for their attorney general nomination, you see everything from the super far left to the suburban, I'm going to solve gun crimes and hit the middle. I'm going to run kind of my general election campaign with McDonald over Savage's way on the other side. And Totten's kind of playing the old fashioned law and order person. In the Republican side, we're kind of seeing that split with just two people. Kevin, I want to say it right. Kajowski? I don't know.
I have no idea.
I practiced it twice. I still have it. I will get it, sir. I'll get it right because I have a feeling we're going to be talking about you
right.
quite a bit. By virtue of his role in the elector's case, that is like rocket fuel inside this GOP primary audience. That's going to play really well for him. And he's got a whole resume behind that. He worked in the Catholic schools in Detroit. He's been very active on the education side of things. So it's not like he just threw out his shingle for lawyer and said, here, I'm running for AG. So he won, and that's not surprising. Whereas on the other side of the divide, we have the more traditional, old school Doug Lloyd. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's more of the establishment type AG campaign. I think he announced right before the convention that he had like a truckload of other county AGs, county prosecutors supporting his campaign. Not all of those people are hanging out at GOP conventions and making things happen. So was that good for him? Yes, that's his strength. He's going to play to that. That'll be a good general election strength should he become the nominee. We'll see how that plays out within the convention audience. And conventions, by their nature, require a lot of hand-to-hand combat. And that's what this conference kind of kicked off. So we're going to have to watch closely to see how those two campaigns keep going. But clearly, Kevin has the leg up.
So with the attorney general's race, and I mean, for all of the convention races, I'm curious about your thoughts. Like, are Republicans going to fall to the same trap they did in 2022, where they nominate candidates at the convention that will just not be good general election candidates? Do you think, when you look at the AG race, do you think Kevin falls into a similar camp as maybe a Matt DePerno, where Doug Lloyd could maybe be more of a good general election candidate, and the same thing in the Secretary of State's race between Yatuma and, Forlini now?
Right. That's a concern for Republicans. They want to win the general. That's the only point of running for this at all, right? One thing to think about is we haven't seen any of these candidates have to go through the ringer as far as background checks yet. And that's going to happen over the next several months. So if there's something in there that makes a candidate disqualified for the general, or at least a tough sell, we haven't heard about it yet. And we're going to have to be listening. We're going to see what's going to happen. Because certainly when we have competitive races for both Secretary of State and AG, both of those campaigns, if they're competent and run by pros, they're going to be digging deep into their opponent's backgrounds. And we're going to be finding out all the bad stuff if it's there. Then there's the, how do you perform on stage? A lot of time, these convention candidates are not people who are used to being out on stage. We're in county party meetings or chicken dinners, and they can say whatever they want because they weren't being recorded and watched. And suddenly, oops, you're elevated to this much bigger platform. That thing that you said in private maybe doesn't go over so well in public. It's a test for somebody to learn how to become an out front politician like that. So that'll be something for us to watch going forward as well. But the last thing might be that in general already, our state level politics have become nationalized, and the Trump team wants that. They need to try to figure out how to have all those people who turned out to vote for Donald Trump in 2024 still come out in this off year. So it's a good year for them in Congress, but that'll work its way down the ticket. So in some respects, if you run a competent campaign and you were part of the Trump team and he ends up doing well, his turnout machine is going to be massive and filled with money. They have a lot of really competent people who literally the whole team from the campaign came over into the White House. Other than Chris LaCivita, and we have him here in politics. He was in Mackinac, so he's around too. They're going to run a competent, they're going to run a competent set of campaigns over the top of all these people and essentially maybe like pull them right along.
Yeah, it seems like, the Trump world is really all in on Michigan right now. We saw, several people from the National Senate and U.S. House worlds at the conference. Christine Noem came to the conference. There was one person who I'm forgetting who it is, but they were like, we're all in on Michigan. This is our number one target. Yep. What does that tell you about 2026 and how Republicans are feeling about it right now?
Well, it should make Democrats nervous. And they lived through this last time where the top of their ticket, their president, was not capable, or the replacement candidate for president was not capable of organizing and setting the stage for everybody down below them. And we have something very different here. So Trump may not have the highest approval rating, but he never really has. So we look at Governor Whitmer. There was a new poll out today from our friends at MRG showing her over 50% again. She's the only one that's doing that, but she's also not engaging where she's blowing her political capital and stuff. She's very intentionally building it and saving it for whatever is next for her. And maybe that's smart, as if you think about politics like a business and her brand, that's what she's doing. But she's left the stage open for the rise of Speaker Matt Hall, for Mike Duggan to come in and actually answer questions, all that good stuff. But the Trump team is super interested in Michigan. They've got a lot on the table here. They don't want to lose the House. That's the number one thing right now. And so is that part of the knock on John James? Sure, some people are using that against him. And almost any other race, that wouldn't matter much. Oh, the president's unhappy with you. It's not like it's nothing. But here, people use that because within the party, we are nationalized. It's if Donald Trump needs somebody in the GOP in the 10th district, then he needs somebody. And if you abandon him, it's going to be a knock on you. It's going to hurt a little bit. And that's why you have to start winning right after that and help things move along, because every 5 seconds we have something new to look at and talk about. So you have part of the Trump operation in Chris LaCivita with the Mike Rogers Senate campaign. That's a big boost for him. I thought some of the knee-jerk complaints are maybe coming from the other side of the political divide would say, oh, look at this convention. There weren't a bunch of presidential nominees, but why would there be? There's one president of our party. It's Donald Trump. He's not interested in that. The closest we got to that was having Vice President J.D. Vance be in Howell earlier in the week, right? And if he's considered one of the possible heir apparents, he was in the state, leading up to it, but not on the island. Donald Trump's not going to have competitors up there campaigning for that. What I thought was really interesting and a sign of the strength of the team that put together this convention, I think that Jim Runstead actually has done a really good job. I mean, he doesn't have tons of resources. He wasn't left with a lot, but he is building on top of what Pete Hoekstra fixed. Pete Hoekstra put out the fire and tried to clean up the yard a little bit here, finished strong with Donald Trump on the ticket. Now you have Runstead doing this. Jennifer Helmer, who was the executive director of the convention, I think did a fantastic job. So you're seeing that event like recover. To my earlier point, I don't know that it will ever look like it did before the pandemic or because of technology. It's not needed to the same level. But to your point, a ton of insiders with a load of inside information. They had the political directors from the RNC, the NRSC, the NRCC, all up there together. I couldn't get enough of that when I watched that like 3 times because they're giving so many details about what they're working on. And I think the person from the NRCC actually just even said, like, I got to make sure I get my majority back. So there's no impeachment. So there's no investigations, because they know that the second the Democrats take over, it's going to become their number one mission to harass or check President Trump. And so that's one of their big goals. So I thought from that aspect, having Rick Cannell there, having Kristi Noem, but having LaCivita and the political directors for all these groups was, like you said, it's a real sign, because in the end, it's the nuts and bolts and details and funding that wins these races behind the scenes. And that's what Michigan needs. And it looks like that's what they're going to get.
Yeah, I thought that panel with the political directors was really interesting too. They also, they did talk about the 10th, which is the seat that John James currently holds. And there was no like, oh, I'm nervous, or like John James needs to stay in here. There was no sly comment from that director, right? And there easily could have been. Like, it would have been an audience that would have liked it. And if you were still trying to send that message from the Trump world, you could have done it then. She said, I'm meeting with people on the 10th. We have, talented people who want to run here. So I thought that was interesting. I think the Trump world could go a lot harder on James if they really didn't want him to leave the seat, I think.
And like, by the way, like when they want to go hard, they don't really hold back. Like you'll know it, right? If it's happening. I do think that, whatever was perceived to have happened at the conference, whether Congressman James, kind of did a flyover, he's a helicopter pilot. I have to explain my own puns. That's not good. That's his goal. And he was saying, I've got the name ID. I've got the lead in the polls. I don't have to do this. And I think a couple other commentators I've seen this week, have said, did it hurt him with the grassroots? Yes. Is it necessarily a bad strategy if you have a campaign strategy overall going forward? No, because of course all the other candidates want James to show up at a debate so they can tear him down, right? And he's like, why should I bother giving him that platform? I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, if they wanted to go hard on him, they would have. They didn't. They've already moved on to that. They're trying to find their candidate in the 10th, and they've accepted that James is running for governor so far. But any day you wake up and look at your phone, something else could be there.
Yes. Yeah. And we should add that the debate between some of the primary candidates and also non-candidates, but maybe potential candidates in the future, was not really a debate. So, was it the worst thing in the world to skip? Maybe not.
It's one of the maybe seems like strange things about these conferences. They're paid for with soft dollars, so they can't be political. And so it was very clear all along that they couldn't be there, as candidates. They were there to discuss policy.
Yes.
Right. So that makes the conversations kind of watered down and lame sometimes. They still took shots at Congressman James, but
yes, there was one at the end. Mike Cox, of course, was
my former boss.
Yes, he's the one who has been doing the most in terms of like calling out James publicly and directly. So moving from Mackinac to what is happening in Lansing or not happening.
I don't know. I couldn't find a parking spot to get in here. So everyone's back. It's like school's back in session.
So you couldn't find a parking spot. Does that mean a budget is close?
I think so. I think so because, clearly I couldn't find a parking spot to get in here today. It's like school's back in session. Everyone's here. The anticipation of a deal after a very long slog of getting to this date has meant there's a lot of activity. The Capitol is abuzz with optimism, fear, dread, excitement. Like it's everything. It's like a horror movie, right? It's like scary and it's exciting all at the same time. I do think that they're getting closer to a deal. And I think, Speaker Hall even in a speech up north, I think he made clear he's like trying to get this thing done. He knows for his future too, that he wants to win a deal, and he wants to win a deal that he's been working on that includes the roads. But he also has to show he can govern and keep things moving. And I think to him, he wants to be able to prove that because he's more than capable of doing that. He's been running Lansing this whole year with nobody getting in his way. And then I'm guessing that he might have some other issues he wants to work on, just like everyone else. And that's like the question for me is now I'm starting to look ahead and say, if they cut this deal and it's finally done, do we have a deluge, of bills that come flying through, or do we take a breath for a second? Are we going to have kind of like a lame duck this year, so to speak, just to try to catch up on things or not? Because one of the things that Speaker Hall said in a speech at Mackinac was like, I think there's only been 12 bills signed into law this year, and the room didn't boo, the room cheered. Mm-hmm. Because Republicans are like, limited government at its best. Thank you very much. So that pressure is not necessarily on him from within the party, but for where his place is going forward, I think he also wants to show he can complete the deal, land the plane, and get on and accomplish other things too.
I'm also curious, as someone who has worked for candidates and officials, what your thoughts are on moving the primary. So there's a discussion about potentially moving it from August to May.
Michigan actually has one of the latest, if not the latest, primary election in the country. And you find this out when the other consultants and RNC people come into Michigan and just start griping up a storm. Like, why is your thing so late? This makes things so difficult, And for an incumbent, it's a great advantage because, the amount of abuse that you'll take paid on the air tends to be limited till after that period of time. But we see repeatedly where contested primaries, and right now we've got them on all sides. I mean, I mentioned that kind of like superstar AG battle going on their side. We're going to see clearly some battles on the Republican side. Mike Rogers is going to be spared that, it looks like, this time around, but in the governor's race, we're not. So there's always been kind of this idea, like, could we move this thing up a little bit? Could it allow more time for our general election winners or not our primary winners to raise some more money, take a breath, regather themselves? That would be good. I have a hard time looking at this process and not thinking it's all about one person.
Who could that be?
His initials are MD. If I were them, I would be doing whatever I could to screw Mike Duggan because he is the only person running a significantly competent operation right now. He is running right down the middle of the field and nobody can stop him. And this can't be a surprise. This is a guy who knows how to fix things. He knows how to plan ahead. He can do more. He can chew gum and walk at the same time. And so he's been planning for this for a while. I mean, you look at the soft money account that's running all the social media ads and putting up stuff. These things got organized like 2 years ago. We were in a meeting one time with somebody that I used to work for, and we were like talking back and forth pleasantries, and he just stops and goes, "Wait a second. Can I just pretend I'm your campaign manager here for the next 10 minutes? And then he was like laying out the path for what my guy, a Republican, was supposed to be doing. That's how he operates. So he's not just the candidate, he's the manager. I'm sure that means that's a heavy load for anybody who works for him. But, we've all been there. But if I'm doing this thing, I don't know why I don't change the filing deadline for independent candidates and move it into the middle of the frickin' winter. I'm going to do whatever. And it may be here, like when you see both sides agreeing on something so readily, something's up, right? And I could see one scenario where Democrats want to end the primary and let Jocelyn Benson get her feet under her and get that rolling. Republicans would like to have a one-on-one fight against Jocelyn Benson. They don't see her as the most skilled candidate, despite the fact that this is her fourth time running, where you watch Mike Duggan be able to enter the budget battles at the legislature and get all this media attention and come out smelling pretty good. She's basically stayed away from all that. There's videos and fun stuff posted. But she's had a different relationship in the legislature. She doesn't feel like clearly she can come in and start punching people around. She ends up getting subpoenaed or dragged before another committee. Her life around the legislature is probably like not so fun, and I want to get out of here. I don't want to be around there. So that's my suspicion that that's what's going to happen here. And I'm sure all it will do is just, I think I already sort of swore earlier, but just piss off Duggan and make him work twice as hard.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right, John. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Heck yeah. Thanks for having me.